Welcome, Central Coast. You're now listening to Solutions News. This is Ronaldo Brudico, and we're going to have some great stories today. Our lead one's going to be about food waste and the impact on society, and particularly on the hungry and the poor. We're also going to do a great story on solar investments in Africa. It's going to surprise you what's happening on the dark continent that's now gaining light. And we're also going to have a great interview with my dear friend Jim Selman, who's got a spectacular new book out. I really have enjoyed reading it. And we're going to be talking to Jim in just a moment as well. And and by the way, Jim's title is called Living in a Real-Time World. Welcome back, Central Coast. I'm about to introduce you to one of my dear friends for many, many years, Jim Selman, whose new book, as I mentioned a moment ago, Living in a Real-Time World, is now available through Amazon on Kindle. I don't like to usually read bios that we have for people before they come on air because I like to synopsize them a little bit and shrink them down. But I just have to read you Jim's because it's too impressive not to. Jim is a recognized thought leader and authority in the field of transformation. He's a member of the Transformational Leadership Council. He's been sharing his original research and futuristic thinking about who we all have to be as we navigate change with an extensive roster of clients on 4 continents for the last 30 years. I know for a fact that Jim was the fellow who really created the whole idea of executive coaching. He was one of the few individuals in the 70s and 80s who distinguished organizational culture as a phenomenon. He identified the need to manifest organizational change, and he distinguished the levers for leaders to generate change, developing a terminology for accelerating its pace. His groundbreaking article, Coaching and the Art of Management, introduced coaching as an alternative paradigm to management. As co-founder and CEO of Transformational Technologies, an operating network of over 70 consulting organizations, he helped bring the first tools of organizational transformation to enterprises in America and Europe. He also co-founded an accredited postgraduate coaching program in Buenos Aires. He continues to coach leaders to the present day around the world. And even more close to my heart, he is a past chairman of the World Business Academy, who's the source of our data that we share with you on this program. And he's a frequent blogger for the Huffington Post. I could keep going, but I won't. That's my dear friend. Jim, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ronaldo. I'm glad to be here.
So, when we were talking about you coming on, I was asking you about this book, and you said to me, what's the different thing about this book is it's not your normal corporate organizational transformational change. This is about something for everybody, whether they're in a corporation or just on their own thinking about how to deal with change.
I think that's right, Ronaldo. I mean, I was thinking about this on the way up this afternoon. Why did I write the book? Mm-hmm. And it really began by a kind of anxiety that I was experiencing. Like I think a lot of people are nervous about what's going on. But more importantly, I began to observe that between the pundits and the media and dinner table conversations, more and more people are talking about reality and about the future, that we're becoming a spectator society.
And you say about what's going on. And one of the key concepts in this book, as I see it, is not just that things are changing, because things have always changed. You're talking about the speed of change itself is now starting to numb us a bit. Our ability to deal with that speed.
I think so, and that's where the concept of real time comes from. If you take the fact of accelerating change, more and more things are unpredictable, the complexity that we're all swimming in, and the consequence of that being a increasing loss of control. You put those 4 things together, and that's what I call a real-time world.
So in your sense, we don't know where we're going, but we're getting there faster and faster.
Well, in a way, that's very well said. The idea of real time really began in the 60s with computers, when the gap between input and output got smaller and smaller and virtually disappeared. Computers transformed from informing to performing. And today I'm observing that the gap between the future and the past is getting smaller and smaller. And the bottom line of that is that we can't trust our past to tell us what to do in the future.
Boy, is that true? And because you're so famous for the work you've done and continue to do internationally, when you stake your hat on this quote, we're in a global transformation, a planetary-wide paradigm shift, you've got that perspective to see that it is global.
Absolutely. I think this has to do with who we are as human beings, how we relate, how we consider the future, and I think everybody's concerned about the future.
So it's not just U.S., it's everybody.
I think it's everybody, and I think the most important idea here is that nobody, at least I say, that nobody really has the vaguest idea what's going to happen. We can have futurists, we can have predictions, we can have guesses, but there's too many examples in the not distant past to show us that things were totally unpredictable. From the iPhone to Google to what's going on with the human genome. In fact, to many of the stories that you speak about on in this program. 10 years ago, people wouldn't be having these conversations. They couldn't have imagined the day's reality.
Yeah, and this is a concept you put in the book that I really like that can help each person see how it can help them individually. You basically are keying off of learn how to navigate.
Learn how to navigate and be prepared for the future, whichever future shows up. In other words, whether it's a dystopian or a utopian future, the point is, are we prepared to deal with it, to change ourselves in a way that allow us to succeed and prosperous and have a good life and a meaningful life in that reality.
And you mentioned how Leif Erikson got to North America. My personal background, because I'm so involved with Hawaii, I know what they did as navigators. And the essence of the skill is to focus on how you're going to get to wherever you're going rather than, and you make this distinction in the book, don't try for certainty, try for clarity.
Exactly. One of the things I'm emphasizing, and it's the subtitle of the book, 6 capabilities to prepare for an unimaginable future.
List them.
Well, for example, the ability to, let me say it by parallel, we all have an ability to read, but it doesn't mean we're all literate. Mm-hmm. So everybody have these capabilities, but they're not all developed in us because
that's not a political comment.
No, we take them
about the current administration.
No, not at all. We take these capabilities for granted, but it's, for example, our ability to accept reality as it is, as distinct from resist and try to control it. Our ability to listen deeply and profoundly can begin to give us a way of mastering moods. Our ability to learn is changing dramatically, and the role of knowledge in dealing with reality is changing significantly every day. You can't count on knowledge to guarantee a job or guarantee a future or guarantee anything. It's important, but it's not central the way it has been in the past. Our ability to build relationships. We very rarely think of our relationships as a competency, mm-hmm. and that we can actually learn to have trust and learn to have successful relationships. I think perhaps the most important one is we can relearn to care. We can cultivate our natural capacity for caring about each other, about the planet, about the future.
You know, I saw this distinction in your book. That living in a real-time world is not about having goals and fixed plans, because you know that joke about how to make God laugh, tell her your plans.
Yeah.
And in your book, you say instead of goals and fixed plans, you talk about purpose, commitments, and possibilities.
Exactly. I think that people mistakenly think sometimes that possibilities exist like facts, like everything is possible or it isn't. I love to tell people that possibilities do not exist in reality by definition. If you could prove a possibility, it wouldn't be a possibility. It would be an example. And so therefore, it's useful to be able to say that we're creating reality every day in our behavior, in our actions, and in our commitments and coordination together. The question is, what reality are we creating? Well, obviously, we're creating the reality we have. But if we're in a real-time world and we can't rely on the past, we have to create the vision, create the possibility first, and then organize our commitments and our actions around that imagined future.
So a lot of people are listening to this driving down the freeway at 5. This is a drive time show, 5 to 6 o'clock. And the 101, you're not driving very fast at this time of day. But because they're not going to be able to write these things down, we will be able to give people information about if they want to write to info@worldbusiness.org. What could they do, Jim, if they wanted to get some of these things you're talking about? Go get the book on Amazon.
I have a website. It's also I have a number of blogs that I've written on it called real-timeworld.com. Real-time. World.com.
World.com. And also, if you mentioned blogging. I know you blog a lot in Huffington Post.
I used to. They've sort of cut off the volunteer bloggers these days.
Okay. So we're not going to read it there. But do you think that this is the kind of thing, if they go to your website, they'll see little nuggets like you're throwing out today?
I think so. And you can also get to some of my other websites having to do with aging and my business website. Just go to jimselman.com, and it's sort of a page to branch out to the various things I've done.
So let me ask you one more question about it. This really got me going. This quote: "Constantly living in the present," which is what you're advocating,
Yes.
is living life as a meditation, embracing every moment as an original. Just talk about that for a second.
Well, I mean, on one level, you could say every moment is an original. The question is whether we're aware of that and whether we live our life as if that's true. I mean, lots of people have cliches and proverbs and various axioms like, smell the roses and savor every moment. And they're all very nice adages, but people don't normally live there. I think we've sort of drifted into a kind of blindness with respect to what's happening, who we are, our relationship to life. And as a consequence, most of us are living life on automatic. I was just going to say that was probably the biggest learning of my life, is to appreciate that I have choices that I didn't know I had. I have a choice in how I relate to the future. I have a choice in how I am, who I am, my way of being in the world. I have many, many, many choices that I never knew were choices most of my life.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, but I want to go back to this word meditation. It's sort of like the idea that you could savor each moment for its originality, which is what you're espousing. How would you compare that to other authors who've written extensively on being in the now, for example?
Well, I think,
Be here now.
I think a lot of people, I mean, I love many of those authors, but I'd say in general, we're operating mostly in a view that experience happens inside you, and that it's personal and it's private. One of the things that you begin to see in a real-time world is that we're all connected in ways that we can sort of appreciate as a concept, but we don't live our lives fully connected to each other or even what's going on in the larger context. I have a basic way of showing this. If you think about it, the only thing that I'm sure is unique to the individual is our ability to make a commitment. The individual is the sole source of your commitments. You can't ever force a commitment on anyone.
That's right.
On the other hand, if you take the second step, none of us can fulfill our commitments by ourselves. So we're always dealing with this paradox of being individual and also being totally interconnected and related to everyone else.
So stay with this concept for a second, because I'm trying to pull out. We have listeners who know the work of Eckhart Tolle. Okay? And we have other, on the spectrum, you could say, Ram Dass, Be Here Now, all those years ago. They're talking about somehow being engaged in this moment-to-moment process, but you seem to be putting a different slant to it.
Well, not too much. I mean, I think that all of that, the Be Here Now view is legitimate. I think the bigger question is how do you translate that idea into your actual day-to-day living? And secondly, how does that begin to occur in larger groups and context? So meditation is a state, in my view. It's a relationship with life. It's not some process that goes on inside your head. All right? It's not simply sitting and, contemplating your breathing. Those are useful tools. But the actual goal, and what's now becoming more and more available in this real-time world, is that we can, by the mere act of appreciating the present and giving up our reliance on the past to tell us what to do in a prescribed way, we begin to invent new ways of connecting with the future that we desire.
It seems to me like as Ram Dass in Be Here Now did an exhortation, and Eckhart Tolle is doing basically a prolonged explanation. What Jim's doing for us is giving us a methodology for being in that moment, original moment, from moment to moment.
Well, a methodology and pointing, basically, I would say it's more accurate to say that I'm pointing to your capabilities already to have that occur.
Welcome back, Central Coast. We're here with our special guest and my dear friend Jim Selman, and we're talking about his book, but more than that, we're talking about what he's learned all these years coaching these incredible executives around the world. Hope you will make a call into him, but if not, we're going to keep talking. Jim, as we went through this, what do you think you'd really like to focus on for people to take away from this interview?
Well, I think at the individual level, it's the last thing I was speaking about, is that you have choices that perhaps you're not aware you have, and that transformation and the kind of leadership that I speak about in the book is really about recognizing that while we don't control much of anything, we always have a choice in how we relate to everything. So if we're able to begin to exercise our power of relationship and our choices in terms of how we relate, suddenly it can give us a great deal of freedom, a great deal of power, and it gives us a basis to have a meaningful and satisfying and mostly serene life.
You know, towards the end of what I read, you were making a suggestion, and it seemed to be a good one, that people who are listening to this, and I do hope they'll call in if they're driving and get a chance for us to give them that Kindle reference again. You say you may want to share this book, or the reading of this book, as a conversation starter.
Exactly. Again, I emphasize, myself included, have no idea what the future is going to be. The question is, are you prepared for any future? And secondly, to be prepared for any future, you have to recognize that there's no way to figure it out. You have to accept that you cannot trust your predictions, and that life is either going to be a function of our future is going to be a function of our automatic historical behavior, or we're going to have to learn new ways to act, new ways to relate, new ways to think about thinking, and then create the future that we want individually. And I'll speak in a moment about organization and some of the implications of this way of thinking to your business.
Yeah, do it. Go to the business part of it.
I'll just give you an example. Everybody I know would say trust is a good thing. And most people don't do anything to change the level of trust in their businesses and organizations. So the lack of trust becomes an excuse or a reason why things don't happen, rather than taking on the necessity of trust in a real-time world. You know, historically, when things change very slowly, you've got time to kind of make mistakes, repair things, put up with a certain amount of caca, and tolerate a lot of things that you simply cannot tolerate if the world's changing so quickly. The second, and probably the most fascinating to me, is that every planning system and every budgeting system on the planet is based on building trends and projections based on the past performance or the analysis of markets or whatever the particular structure may be. If you accept the premises that I'm offering of what is going on in the world as a real-time world, then you have to say, suddenly I need to reinvent my whole approach to planning, my whole approach to budgeting. And for example, the relationship between investors, boards of directors, and corporate leadership is traditionally separate, and for the most part, boards and investors are concerned with control and predictability. That tends to be the largest component for most of that thinking.
Right. So how do you deal with that? I mean, because predictability, by your definitions, you can't have.
Well, for example, those three roles, those three stakeholders, and this could be said for many other stakeholders, need to be aligned, mutually committed, and mutually responsible for whatever plans and directions people have. So, for example, if you're on the Star Trek Enterprise and you're going where no one's ever gone before and you don't have maps to get there, it's very important that everybody on the ship is aligned with whatever direction and whatever plans and whatever contingencies are involved in going where no one's gone before.
So I find that interesting because most people think of businesses as living with budgets, long-term budgets, minimum of, say, 5 years, or you want to look into the future, and certainly 1 year of really hard budgeting. And what you're saying is it's not inconsistent with that historical business preference. It's how you come up with that through your interactions with your coworkers.
That's right, and I'm not saying to ignore the past, but I'm saying the past and knowledge basically become one element in the creative process of inventing the future that you wish to have. It's then about making that future happen, not letting, quote, reality be the constraint. So all of the constraints and reasons and limitations that people use to justify why things are not going the way they wish now become actionable in a real-time world.
It's like the Course in Miracles says, all your past is gone and nothing is left but a blessing. And what I think you're adding to it is and the now that past led to.
Yes, and I'm also saying, look, this is not a metaphysical theory. Reality doesn't care what we think, but at some point, as an individual leader, as an individual human being, you have to say, who am I in this uncertain reality, or this in the middle of this uncertainty? I think when I was growing and learning over the years, perhaps the most central component had to do with, is it up to me how I experience life? Or do I simply live in variations of reacting and coping with what's happening?
Is that where you mostly live, Jim, in your experience?
I think most people react to what or cope with reality as the cards are dealt, and that can be good or bad. You just been speaking about the optimist daily. The concept optimism implies some form of positive prediction. Mm-hmm. Okay, just like cynicism is a predictive state. It's not a fact, but it's a way of relating to the reality. So you can relate to the reality cynically, or you can relate to the reality optimistically.
Yeah, to us it's the glass half full, the glass half empty.
Exactly.
And so optimism is the state of mind for how you look at the data you're seeing anyway.
That's right. But I have observed that many people, and you can see this over dinner at any restaurant you go to, are having a debate or a conversation about whether things are optimistic or pessimistic. They're talking about the future. They're talking about the way it is. They're having a conversation like spectators looking at a football game, as if the people in the bleachers in the stands have anything to do with what's happening to the game. And it's that lack of responsibility and involvement, I think, that is the source or one of the sources of people's general anxiety and questionable moods around what's going on in their lives.
Going back to the individual now from the organizational structure, but to the individual, a lot of people just can't see more than one paycheck ahead. And what we've been encouraging people in the academy to do is to take a different viewpoint of it's up to you. Basically, don't wait for the government to help you. Don't wait for the government to even work, frankly. Although it's open this week, we don't know what will happen next week. And we're trying to give people a sense of how they can take control of their lives so they're not victims. And I think what I'm hearing you say is the way you take control is not by knowing for a certainty where you're going, but rather knowing for a certainty how you intend to navigate that process.
Well, I think that's right. And I also think that the ability to take control of your life has to do with how you relate to your life more or as much as anything you do.
So what would you say to someone who's struggling financially, which is a huge problem in this country? They were one paycheck away from tragedy. How do they interpret living in a real-time world?
I'd say step number one is to be able to accept your situation, which I can have compassion for, but that you can accept your situation as the way it is. And when you can really accept that you are living a life based on that reality, you can then open up possibilities to begin to invent a future for your life or a narrative for your life that's not defensible in terms of your history. So, for example, if in my own case, I'm 77 years old and I'm going to run a marathon in May. Now,
congratulations.
Now, from where I was about 2 months ago, that's an impossibility. Okay, and I'm having to invent it, and my mind keeps telling me, "No way, this is ridiculous. Why are you doing this?" And it's constantly trying to talk me out of that.
Okay? But you're not going to let it.
And I think a lot of people live their lives where their minds are trying to talk them out of the future they say they want, talk themselves out of those possibilities. Now, I don't know whether it'll ever happen or I'll end up walking it, but I do know that I'm living my life today in the possibility of accomplishing something that would be very special if I'm able to do it.
When I first heard about the book, the first thing that occurred to me is we now live in a time when people don't have a single career.
Yeah.
The job changing phenomenon is accelerating as well.
And the concept of job is disappearing. The concept of job is disappearing.
So if you think of occupation, if you think of livelihood, and you know that you're not going to be born a farmer and die a farmer, or born a factory worker, die a factory worker, and that you could and likely will have 10 to 15 different occupational directions, this is the way to be able to help yourself through all that change, which you can't avoid.
Well, that's right. But even the conversation as we're having it is the kind of conversation people have over dinner about will there be jobs or won't there be jobs or what are you going to do if that happens? And it's all based on taking your history and trying to imagine what you'll do if something happens. And I'm saying that's okay, but it doesn't make a lot of difference in terms of how reality actually occurs.
Because it's got its own
Yeah.
way of manifesting.
Yeah, but what does make a difference is how you are prepared, how you cultivate your innate humanness in order to be able to be the best possible human you can be. And most people, I would say, are operating on a relatively small percentage of their potential and their capability for navigating in a world, including very difficult circumstances like you're describing in terms of the economics.
Yeah, no, you mentioned at the beginning of this interview that it's not metaphysical, but you are asking people to go to a deeper level of awareness and self-awareness.
Oh, well,
Very much so.
I'm asking them just to open their eyes to what's obviously happening.
Mm.
I'm not asking them to go internal. I'm not asking them to go inside themselves. I'm asking them to sort of wake up that we're living in a world that we can't predict and where we can't control. And that's a very different world than the one we grew up in.
Yeah,
because the world, when it was stable, could be predicted, could be controlled, and you more or less could navigate within a pretty predictable range.
Yeah, when I meant go inside, what I mean by that is you're telling them to take responsibility for all those changes by opening up to the possibilities those changes will
Absolutely,
create.
absolutely.
That's the go inside part. I want to really thank our guest, Jim Selman. I hope that, like me, you'll find the book fascinating, Living in a Real-Time World. And I'm really excited that as we go through this interview today, Jim threw out so many good ideas. Go to his website or go to info@worldbusiness.com. Let us help you understand more about it. So thanks for sharing your wisdom, Jim.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.